Hey everyone, this is David Pike, the Motorcity Mechanic. Now today we're starting a series on the new Jeep Wrangler, the 2018 and beyond body style JL. In this particular video, I'm going to show you step by step what you need to know when it comes time to remove the radio. So what we're going to be doing in today's video is I'm going to go over the steps that's required for removing that radio, just like I mentioned. But there's some things that I need to point out that if you don't pay attention to, you could actually do some damage to some of these trim panels. Oh, and by the way, before we get started, I feel the need to clarify something because I know someone's going to comment about this. Yes, it's a 2018. No, it's not a piece of junk because the radio is already being replaced. Because there's nothing wrong with the radio. Keep in mind, this video is not only for today, but it's also for the future, years from now when people need to know how to replace a radio on a JL. So once again, let me cut you off there before you leave that comment. There's nothing wrong with the radio. Now the removal of the radio requires different trim panels to be removed in different orders. Obviously you would think you would grab the trim bezel on the radio and start popping it off. But in this case, the lower edge of the radio bezel actually extends behind the trim panel that has the AC control head. So that means that the AC control head has to come off first. Once that comes off, then we can deal with the bezel around the radio. Once that's off, we've got a series of bolts that actually bolt the radio to the dash assembly. And then last but not least, we've got connectors on the back side that we've got to unplug. Once that's done, then the actual radio can be removed from the vehicle. Now to begin with, we need to work on removing the panel that the AC control head mounts to. Now this panel extends all the way to the driver's side where that push to start button is, and then all the way over to the passenger side where the grab handle starts. So it's this piece of trim right here that we're going to be popping loose. Once we get it popped loose, we've got access to the back side of the AC control head where if we want, we can disconnect it and then set it to the side. Or if we're going to leave it there, we need to be careful about it hanging. That way it doesn't scratch any of the painted surfaces or any of the smooth plastic areas that where a scratch will be very noticeable. Now when you're prying on plastic panels, you need to be very careful. Not only that you don't break them, but also that you don't bend up the edges and that you don't scratch the surface of that panel or the adjoining panel. Now one way you can do this is actually just using tape. Tape is very inexpensive. On a surface such as this, the textured one I'm not too concerned about, but this smooth area right here, any scratches that you make on there are going to be very noticeable. So it doesn't hurt to just put tape in certain areas. Like I said, tape is cheap. Just put it around the perimeter so that if we are prying against it, we're not going to be marring and scratching it up. Because the last thing we want to do is have one of our plastic trim strips slip and then put a nice little gouge or scratch across it. Because even though it's plastic, it can still scratch the surface. And if you're still really concerned about this grab handle in the textured area, hey, there's no harm in adding more tape there as well. Tape is not an issue, it's cheap like I said. The dash pieces aren't. So just keep adding till you get to a spot that you feel pretty comfortable about, that you've got enough room to work with. And the good thing about this type of tape, this blue tape, it doesn't leave a residue behind. So now we've got a gap all the way around. That's what we're going to be prying against. Now when it comes to trim sticks, there's different styles out there. We've got plastic ones, we've got metal ones. It really depends on what you're working on. There's stuff underneath the vehicle that you're not worried about scratching. Maybe some kind of push pins or stuff that you need to pop loose. That the metal ones work great. But being that we're doing interior work, we need some plastic ones as well. And these things over time will wear out, they will break, so they're pretty much disposable. So you're going to be constantly going through these. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a different assortment of these, take them to the vehicle and see what works best on the situation that we're dealing with. So go ahead and pick out one of those plastic trim sticks that we just grabbed out of the toolbox, and then find your edge, insert it. Now, you can try prying, but prying usually requires force up against something else. but if you can actually kind of pull outward with it, that way you're not prying against something, you're just up under the edge and you're pulling back, that usually works fairly well. And just start pulling it and then work your way around the perimeter. And just keep working until you get to the driver's side. Hold it with one hand until you finally get it loose. Now you can rotate it and see that there's a connector on the back side. Now that connector on the back of the AC control head has a single stage lock. Basically what that means is we don't have anything we need to slide out of the way. We don't have anything we need to lift up to release. In this case, all we got to do is squeeze in on the connector right here and kind of wiggle the connector at the same time to release it. Now with that taken loose, we've got one more connector we need to release, and that's over there for that push to start button. Now the connector on the push to start button is almost identical to the AC control head. Once again, squeeze in and wiggle the connector off. Now we can grab that control head and sit it to the side. So at this point you're thinking all you got to do is pull on this trim piece around the radio, right? Well, if you do that, you're going to break something. We've got two more fasteners we got to take loose. We've got a Phillips screw here, we've got a Phillips screw over here. Both of those have to come off first, then we can actually start working on pulling this trim piece off. So now we're ready to start working on removing that trim piece. Now if we were prying on the sides, I would say put a piece of tape on both sides because of the painted surfaces. But being that we removed that AC control head underneath and the two fasteners, we can actually use the bottom of the trim here to break it loose. So just grab a corner and start pulling gently and working your way up and around the radio. And there you go. You've got a series of plastic snaps around that go into little square or rectangle shaped holes, and that's what keeps that trim piece in place. Now the radio itself is attached to a total of 4 Phillips screws. There's actually one in each one of the corners that we've got to remove. Now different radios will have a different amount of connectors on the back side. This particular one has 5. Features you might have are USB connectors, you might have GPS, satellite antenna, you're always going to have your power and ground, and you're going to have your main antenna. So each one has to be disconnected separately. Each one of these has single stage locks where you just squeeze in and wiggle, take it off. And they're color coded, and each one, the way that the connector is designed, there are tabs and fingers so you can't get them in the wrong place. So just work your way around and start disconnecting each one. And then last but not least, we've got the main connector. This is the one that has the power and ground, communication, stuff like that. Now this has a latching arm style. What we got to do is we got to squeeze in, lift up on the arm. As we're lifting up, we can actually wiggle the connector too in case it's getting kind of stuck until it's finally released, and then we can pick it up. So go ahead and grab your replacement radio, get that main connector, make sure you've got it lined up where it's going to be properly positioned. Sit it on there, and as you go down, that latch arm is going to start coming down. As you press more, you'll be able to start moving that latch arm till it locks in place. And now all we got to do is go around the perimeter and start plugging in all the connectors that we disconnected earlier. Now I know I mentioned earlier that most of them are going to be color coded, but in this case that's not what's happening. We've got a white one that definitely goes to white. But the one thing I did tell you that does take effect is you can't plug the wrong one into the wrong connector because the way that they're keyed or the way those fingers line up. So in this case, this teal colored one does go to that kind of a tan colored, golden color. That does lock on there. So now we can actually put this back up on the dash. Now as you're installing the radio back up to the dash, just take care about the painted surfaces on the left and the right. Just kind of keep it lined up as you're going. Get it up there, line it up, and now we're ready to install the 4 Phillips screws around the perimeter. Best to start a couple of them, and then that way you can take your hand off the radio and that'll help you with installing the rest. So now we're ready for that trim panel that goes around the outside of the radio. Let's sit up here gently, kind of line it up to where those plastic snaps are going into those rectangle shaped holes, and just start pushing down. So you hear it snap into place all the way around. Make sure everything's flush, make sure there are no gaps. Now we got to install the 2 Phillips screws underneath. So at this point, grab your AC control head. We're going to plug in the connector for that push to start button. We're also going to grab the connector for the AC control head itself, snap that in. And then we're going to start guiding the wire for that push to start button up into that round hole. It's best to go a little bit at an angle to get it up in there. Then start working your trim around this bottom corner where it needs to be. Start lining up those fingers with the plastic snaps into their appropriate cutouts. And start pushing it into place. And as you push it, you'll start hearing snapping sounds, and that's those plastic pieces latching in. Once everything is flush, no gaps, now we can work on removing the tape. Like I said, this tape doesn't leave any residue. It's cheap, and it saves you the aggravation of having a customer complaining about how you just scratched their brand new Jeep. And now you've got to come up with a way to pay for it. So definitely make sure you use this whenever there's any questionable spots where you might scratch the plastic trim. So if you liked today's video, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and give it a big thumbs up as well. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you got any comments or suggestions about anything you saw in today's video, or anything Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, or Ram related, you can email me at david@motorcitymechanic.com. If you feel the need to send me something, I've now got a P.O. box. So you can send it to Motorcity Mechanic at P.O. Box 240, Grovetown, Georgia 30813. Also, if you'd like to shop on Amazon, please make sure to click on the link in the description below this video, and any purchases that you make will help support this channel. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.